Okay, I want to welcome Professor Joe Jesson. Virtual clap.
Nice.
All right. Professor Joe was awarded General Electric's Top Innovation Prize, the Edison Award, in 2007. He is the holder of 15 patents and is the current IEEE Princeton Life Chair, which I'm sure you'll explain what that is. And he is here this evening to tell us all about the iconic RCA communication receiver, the AR-88, its significance during World War II, and the restoration of his own that he has, and did a very nice restoration from some pictures I saw. So please welcome Professor Joe Jesson. Joe, could you say a little bit more about yourself and where you're coming from?
Yeah, sure. I really got interested in radios when I worked in Trenton in the early 60s through maybe 68. Right after the riots, I left Trenton. But I worked for I think he was the co-founder or the founder of DVRA, Les Allen. I don't know if you guys knew Les Allen in Trenton, but he had the only communications shop in Trenton, at least when I got started in the 60s. So I used to manage his service shop, and I used to calibrate things. And I used to go there every night after high school. So they kept me, at that time, all the information, you had to go to the library to find anything. And then I had a bunch of friends from civil defense, like Ed Razor. And I had quite a few of the best Elmers in the early 60s. Carl Polhemus, I don't know if you know any Ed Razor or anyone like that. Al might remember those characters. But anyhow, that's where I got started. And at that time, I had a chance, every so often I'd get a Hammerlin Super Pro or a Helicrafters, Hammerlin 120 Super Pro. And then I had a bunch of Helicrafters, but I never saw a AR-88 until much later. And of course, there's good reason why you didn't see it, because it all went to Great Britain and Russia, and all was into military use from our allies. But so let me see if I could share the screen, and like I talked to Dave beforehand, and if you wanted to jump in on anything, I'm open for that until if it turns into craziness, then I think Dave will manage it, right, Dave? But you're all welcome.
Yeah, if we just have people speak one at a time. If we start stepping all over each other, we'll have to go back to raising our hands. But just be polite, and we should be good.
Okay. So Dave, you have to give me a screen sharing rights. You're the host.
I think that means you make him co-host, Dave.
Yeah, I thought I did. I'm looking at that right now.
Dave, what you can do is go to screen share at the bottom, and you see that it says manage multiple participants.
Okay, I see it. It came through. So now we should start sharing my presentation. Does everybody see it?
Got it.
Yes.
Coming in? Okay, good. Well, so what I'm going to talk about is what I wanted to do was to put the AR-88 in context to the times and why it was the preferred interceptor equipment and receiver, and just talk about what were the competitive receivers before going into World War II, and why this was the preferred. The Y operators really like the AR-88, and there's real good reasons I'll go into later on that. But So I'm going to talk a little bit about the whole process of what Bletchley Park was up to. And the interception receivers were, of course, one piece of the puzzle, but a very critical piece if you're trying to intercept Nazi communication and around the world. There had to be certain receiver attributes that the specs actually went to David Sarnoff is rumored, and I don't know if you guys can confirm this, but David Sarnoff is rumored to tell his chief engineer that cost is no object on this. I don't know if that's true or not. And I'm sure the first units were built out of their Camden facility.
We'll find that out from Dr. Alex when we see him.
Yeah. Just don't bring up
what we talked about before, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the first slide here, around Bletchley Park, and not in Bletchley Park, you know why they didn't have any interception equipment right at Bletchley Park, don't you? Well, the problem is you get into some pretty large aerials, large antennas, and you didn't want Bletchley Park on anyone's radar as they spot antennas all over the place. So they had several listening spots throughout the UK at the time. And in this particular case, they had Portsdown Tunnel. In the tunnel was actually a monitoring post. And they had posts all, like I say, all around the UK. And if you look at the receiver on the left, so that's an AR-88. And you'll see from other slides. So let me take the whole process, really the workflow between when the Germans wanted to send a command. What they actually had three operators. So when the Panzer General Heinz Guderian wanted to send a message, he had a form operator, message form operator. You have the encryption operator with let's say a 3-rotor Enigma machine. And then you had the actual guy sending the encrypted Morse code. So you had a Morse code actual radio operator. And he would send this with a key that would be in a field transmitter. So it seemed like a full crew just to send one message. And this is an example of the early 1941 Lorenz encryption machine. And you could see the rotors actually set the key, for example, for encryption. And this one's a pretty cool setup. I mean, you have at Knockholt, you have, it looks like you have the AR-88s. How many you got there? 4, 6, 7, 8. Looks like 8 of them. 8 of them. So these were set up for diversity. One of the more popular configurations was multiple AR-88s that would be sensing the level and basically pick up the strongest signal. What today they call it RSSI weighted. So in this particular case, they would have multiple receivers looking at maybe a vertical antenna and a horizontal antenna and different antennas to give you consistent reception. And these are about 100 pounds a piece, right, Al? The AR-88s. So
yeah, that's when they're in the case. I think maybe it's only 85 or 80 out of the case and stuck in the rack.
Yeah, the manual has the shipping weight is at around 100 pounds. So this is so that you have large antennas. In some cases, you had curtain antennas, and you had probably rhombics. I didn't see a rhombic in my literature search, which is a good point to talk about my literature search. So every so often I help out at the Sarnoff on campus where I teach, the College of New Jersey. And one day I got a invite to come into the Hadley Library to see And I spent the whole day looking for AR-88 information. And, well, it turns out this was all classified stuff. So I think they burnt most of it, unless you guys know where there's some pretty good documents. I think, Al, I've gotten some documents from you in the past. But the Hadley Library was a big disappointment. I couldn't find any relevant AR-88 documents. And somebody had said that there's a library in New York that had have some documents. I haven't followed up on that. But in this particular case, you could see the large antennas being used. Again, it's not even close to Bletchley Park. And so a Y station intercept operator would go into a 4 to 7 month training program. And this, when I started doing research, I realized this is really more than a person that can handle Morse code. So this looks like something today. You'd probably need some heavy duty artificial intelligence to do what they had to do as a Y intercept operator. So here's the problem. A lot of these field radio operations would be drifty. So they had portable equipment that would drift all over the map. So the Y operator was trying to divide up the task by monitoring understanding the fist of the Morse code operator, and actually relate that to they would assign a made-up name, a German name, to this particular operator. And they would look up and down bands, and if they switched frequencies, this Y operator would know the fist, know the rhythm of their Morse code keying, and it's pretty crazy stuff. I mean, and they would try to hold on to that operator. And then you had the additional problem with drifting. You know, their field transmitters would drift all over the place. So the Y operator had to keep track of the drift and the operator and the scheduled frequency changes, you know, all through their frequency monitoring. So this is what their logs look like. If you look at the bulk of their logs are encrypted messages with you can see AOHLC, and underneath that XFGEL. Well, what that is five alpha characters, and that's the output of the Enigma machine. You'd get groups of 5 alpha characters. So this would be examples of encrypted communication. So these would be logs, and you could see the date, the call sign sent. This was at 5,400 kilohertz in RST, and so forth, signal strength and so forth. And so these were paper logs that the Y operators would be writing this good stuff down. You can see some of the notes about heavy atmospheric noise, interesting stuff. They also, Y operators were trained to find the transmitter source. So they would go through a form of triangulation and get a rough location of where the transmitter source is. I mean, they wouldn't use today, they use things like latency that measure accurately the time delay. And here they'd look at signal strength, and they would start comparing the signal strength between different sources, so they'd collaborate on a triangulation. This I thought was pretty cool, is that if you look at the lower right-hand corner, you see a bunch of women motorcycle riders. So they would be dispatched to pick up all the logs. So when the logs are written out by all the Y operators, there's teams of motorcycle riders that would grab the paper logs and then drive back to Bletchley Park with a motorcycle, and then drop it off to initially, I believe it was Hut 2, one of the facilities there that were called huts. And so the input of the logs would then go to the decryptors, the manual, and then of course that's where eventually they worked on the computer, Alan Turing's famous bomb computer. And so the dispatch motorcycles were done, but they also had pneumatic tubes set up, and then they had remote teletype writers. So you had 3 ways of communicating log files back. So here's an example of traffic routing. And so I did quite a bit of research on what this means. So I'll make it brief, but what's interesting about this is they segregated Army, Navy, and so forth. And but they had various huts. They would route. Notice most of the Army traffic would be going into Hut 6, and Hut 6 is very busy. And I did some research to find out why it was busy. Well, they had the best. They had really the team leader that was the smartest guy in the group, and but believe it or not, it wasn't Alan Turing. So this was interesting too, because when Alan Turing developed the computer for decryption, I wanted to know who would he go to when he had problems. So you always find the expert by asking bunches of people, where do you go when you can't solve a problem? So here's Alan Turing designing a decryption machine that's never been done before, a decryption computer. And he turns to a guy named Gordon Welchman. So that name kept popping up, and I got several books on Welchman, and he's a really fascinating person. In my opinion, he's at least as fascinating as Alan Turing, maybe more. And anyhow, so he was Hut 6, so that's why a lot of this messaging went to Gordon Welchman first. All right. Let's see here. So this looks like a shot when things are starting to wind down. At the end of this, of course, they burned everything. And but they did most of the decryption. In fact, all the decryption up until they started with the first computer decryption was all done manually. And they used some tricks. What they had called cribs was what would give them a limitation on the search space, so they could just divide down their search space if they knew that every message ended up with Heil Hitler or the weather. They used to use the weather on and the radio operators would always put the weather forecast, and that would be called a crib. So they knew instead of having all these combinations that's listed here, you get it down to a reasonable search space when you start doing that. So one of his problems was Alan Turing's problem when he tried to develop a computer around it was, how do you decrease the search space? And they had what's called the diagonal board, which would be common settings in the rotors. It would simulate the common settings in the rotors, and that would set them up for parallel searching through the search space. And it turns out it wasn't Alan Turing that designed that; it was Gordon Welchman. So, as I mentioned, this guy here was managed Hut 6, and if it wasn't for him, they would have never gotten Churchill support, because he was a guy that had enough drive. I don't know. I won't use another word I was thinking of. But there had to be some people that would communicate directly to Churchill on what they needed, resources and stuff that he needed to talk to. Somebody needed to talk to Churchill directly, because Churchill called this the most important development of the entire war, and shortened the war by 2 years is what the experts estimate to be. So this is the guy that actually took the request for a computer from Alan Turing, and he went to Churchill requesting the money, the funds. You imagine in the middle of war, you want all this money to build a computer. So this is the guy that had the brains and the directness to go directly to Churchill, which they got the money. So I followed up a little bit on, before I get into the actual restoration of the radio, which was probably the most important part for you guys. But I found this to be interesting. So in the research and a lot of stuff that it turns out at the end of the war, what happened was we know the story of Alan Turing. You know, he committed suicide, and but Gordon Welchman, I followed him, and he ended up leaving the UK and moved to the United States. He taught, his first job there was he moved to the US in 1948, right after the war, and he taught MIT's first computer engineering course. And then he worked for MITRE Corporation from 62 to 71. And he was a battlefield communication consultant for NSA, which is really interesting, from 1980. And so the drawing we're looking at here was his concept of a complete endless loop of communication, and that would go anywhere across the battlefield, anywhere across the world. That loop can be global if it had to be, but what he wanted to do was be able to communicate with tanks, planes, helicopters, all across the battlefield, all with a continuous bus type configuration. And what got me interested, I'm looking at this, and this guy invented the internet, right? So, I thought that was interesting, Gordon Welchman's work. And he was finally kicked out of the NSA and MITRE because he ended up publishing a book about what actually happened in Bletchley Park. And he thought, here it is in the 1970s and 1980, it's what secrets are left from World War II, right? Instead, they took away his clearance and they kicked him out. They said, you can't write a book. What are you doing publishing this book? We told you not to publish a book. So he was pretty upset. They kicked him out of MITRE and NSA clearance. Okay, so this was, as I said earlier, our favorite interception receiver. Best design, cost is no object. And a few places it was manufactured. And what I had found in little literature I came across, it looked like they build the prototypes in Camden. Camden was their go-to place for assembly and building stuff. And this was done on a Lend-Lease contract, which if you're familiar with a Lend-Lease contract in World War II, what was your allies got basically a free equipment. And I don't think there was any charge at all. I think it was just, we'll lend you this equipment. By the way, when the war is done, we want you to destroy all this equipment. And of course, we know now a lot of this went into Great Britain, Russia, stayed there. This is when we thought Stalin was our friend, But comparing, so the two most popular choices at that time was the HRO5 or the AR-88. So the problem is as I mentioned earlier, with a lot of the German field equipment, it was very drifty. They weren't using crystals, so it would drift all over the place. So you don't want to combine their drift unless you could phase it, or at least predict where it's going to go, and design the radio drift, the local oscillator drift, to go the other direction, which you can't do. So the national HRO had a drift of 0.001%. So at 30 megahertz, it's significant. Whereas the RCA 88, it's well within 0.001. So after a little bit of digging, I found something really interesting. So I'm thinking, well, it must have been an RCA engineer that spec'd this, right? No, it was Gordon Welchman. Gordon Welchman says, you have to control the drift on these receivers, and here's your spec for the receiver, sensitivity and drift. So again, it gets back to a guy that gets no credit, and we don't even hear about. It doesn't even show up in he showed up briefly, I think, in the Imitation Game movie about. And so this was the lineup. So the unit, I wanted to get one for the museum, the Sarnoff Museum. So I said, hey, you can't really have a museum unless you have an AR-88. So I sent out some feelers, and people wanted a lot of money on eBay for an AR-88, and I found one in Virginia that was pretty well corroded, unfortunately, but it had everything to it. So and I only had to pay $300 for it, which wasn't my money. It was the library or the museum that actually bought it. So this is kind of the lineup here. You got two tuned RF stages, mixer, 3 IF amps, and you have the voltage regulator for additional stability. And the two tune frequency stages get very little bit of radiation goes back out of the antenna. So if you're playing an interception game, you don't want the enemy to come up close to Bletchley Park, and you can take a look at how many local oscillator accidental transmitters are there, because you can figure out how many radios the enemy has and what they're listening to. So that second RF stage pretty well isolates the path from V3 local oscillator out through the antenna. Certainly important for any kind of submarine work. You want to make sure you're not a transmitter. So this is this puppy when we took it apart. It's, and I say we, Jonathan Allen was a friend of the museum, so he comes in on Wednesdays and he helps me out on fixing the radios and getting the old RCA working again. So this was actually pretty good. We just replaced the electrolytics, and the only problem we had was, well, the front panel was, like I say, pretty ugly. This is pretty, you can see the corrosion on the bottom. It's pretty bad. This was kept in looked like a farmhouse, a small farmhouse that was used as a garage. So I think it got wet a few times. And so this is fortunately the variable caps all worked, and you could see the multi-gang RF sections that were all tuned RF. They weren't broadband, so they were all tuned. Does this look familiar, Al?
Oh, yeah. And they're not only all tuned, but you'll notice there's a large and a small section in each one of those caps. So that allows them to tune the broadcast band in one band at the bottom, but have reasonable band spread at the higher frequencies by only using part of each cap.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the longer we looked at this, and we thought, well, maybe we should have hunted around for a bargain that wasn't this rough, But everything was there. We got everything working. And the nice thing is the dial was good, and I don't remember us touching that. Once you touch the dial, you can have all kinds of crazy things go wrong, wipe off, So we stayed away from the dial. There might be people making replacement graticules for this. Do you know of that, Al?
I'd kind of be surprised. I don't know if the market's big enough for somebody to take that on. The popular receivers, people do that, but there just aren't that many of these. I haven't heard of anybody doing it.
Radio days in upstate New York, if you show them an example, if you have one, they will duplicate it, obviously for a price.
Wow. Well, you can see this one was clean. So once we took the front panel off, we were happy to see this very, very clean.
What did they do to keep the oscillator stable?
I'll show you that. I think the regulator was a gas discharge tube. So you know how they work. It breaks down at a certain voltage, and so it regulates it like a tube type Zener, but only with the gas discharge.
Well, there's the VR tube, but there's also temperature compensating capacitors.
Right. That's right. So there was temperature compensated caps. They obviously did their homework. The designer was fantastic. Who figured all this out on the drift. And again, that was specified by Bletchley Park and Gordon Welchman. But what that'd be. So one of the caps had shorted, and it took the B plus across the low frequency coil and opened it. And unfortunately, it wasn't opened at one of the at one of the solder posts. It was open inside the coil here.
Can you help me? Can you give me a good shake?
What's that?
Oh, that is perfect.
Yeah. So that's the only problem we had with that. We didn't get a replacement. I tried to unwind it and rewind it, but it was buried somewhere in the first part of the first windings on the the burned piece. But a shorted cap can open a coupling coil like this if you're not careful, because it brings the B plus directly across the winding to ground, which is a shorted cap. So this is kind of interesting too. I've been teaching several engineering courses at the college in New Jersey, and I thought, it'd be really interesting because we teach all students before they build anything, before they design anything. They model it first, with the equations, but then they go ahead and simulate it with PSpice. So couple groups, I thought it might be interesting to hand them. What I did is I took the front end, the RF double RF section, all the way tuned circuit all the way to the mixer, and I took that schematic and I just clipped that part of the schematic, and I says, all right guys, what I want you to do for your term project is to convert this. I want you to simulate this with PSpice, and if you want to know how to simulate a vacuum tube, we're going to look up, I'll send you some information on field effect transistors, because it looks just like a dual gate MOSFET. and then we were able to actually find some tube PSpice models. So I had a couple students groups, a couple lab groups that really did a great job. They actually got to the point where they ended up getting, for example, they ended up getting the output of the second RF stage and into the mixer. You see how sharp that is. So they were able to get some good, some excellent Q and very selective front end on the AR-88. It's too small to see, but I have the whole report if you wanted to see that. And I have the models too in PSpice. So that was an interesting project, because one of the goals of Sarnoff Museum was to use it as a tool to educate engineers at the college in New Jersey. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to use this in the classes, Well, here's what's interesting too. If you look at the characteristic curves of this, it's almost identical to the field effect transistor. Different voltages, of course, widely different voltages. And so in the beginning, they were comparing here the FETs, the JFET, the MOSFET, and the BJT. And so, of course, they picked the MOSFET. That's the closest to a vacuum tube with different voltage levels, as I said. Okay. Anyhow, so that's pretty much all I've got here. If you guys have any questions at all?
Did your students get a chance to model it with a soldering iron?
You mean build the I think we ran out of time in class time for that one, but I'll tell you,
that's always the best proof of performance.
I'm embarrassed to say that the engineering students, there's no formal soldering course. Can you believe that? Neville's laughing, but it's true. I mean, I actually have to set up, we set up soldering classes right at the Sarnoff, and then the students can sign up for free and they can learn how to solder, because it's just criminal to let students graduate, EE students graduate without ever using a soldering iron, That should be against the law, But needless to say, I'm not in the mood to protest at this point. Just set up, and that's where it helps to get you guys involved too, is if you're interested, if you can teach soldering, this is always a useful skill for students to come into Sarnoff and teach the young kids how to solder. That's something very useful. And it's also very useful too, because what I do teach in all my labs, for example, is I always, if you simulate it, you do build it. We didn't build this because, you know, it gets into high voltage tubes, which I'm not sure we could acquire enough tubes and high voltage equipment, power supplies to get this thing. All the new power supplies won't handle tubes, of course, that we have in our labs. But the students are always looking for help at the end of the simulation. They do have to build everything. And then after they build it, they have to get it to work. And then once they get it to work, they have to answer the questions, what error have you measured versus your simulated piece-based model? So they do get a comprehensive going from the model to simulation, build it, and verify the circuit. So that's kind of good. And of course, where they get usually stuck is when they have to test it and find out why it doesn't work. So, which is great opportunity to troubleshoot, you know, and that's why you get mature people that have been around the block can help with, you know, simple circuits, RC, RCL, and RLC, and transistor FETs and bipolar debugging, and then when sometimes I'm teaching a CATS course on communication or RF circuits, so then they have to determine oscillator drift and how to counteract the oscillator drift, TCO, and so forth, how to design a TCO. So it's fun, and anytime you guys have some time, you're welcome to just come on over, and we would love to have you participate either at the Sarnoff or classes. You know, students, they get stuck, and sometimes it's pretty frustrating. I mean, you know, I've had students work at debugging for 5 hours. And then they get so mad and upset they don't want to. They don't even want to be an engineer after that. But I always give them my personal cell number, and in case they get into trouble, I say, "Well, send me a schematic with all the node quiescent voltages on the nodes, and then, you know, I could figure it out at that point. You know, if they take voltage measurements at each point, and it's always useful to teach history too. We just had a Sam Russell who worked on the Apollo cameras at RCA. I don't know if you guys saw that, but they have a recording of that too. You can get a copy of the recording that was over at the Sarnoff when he talked about the history of NASA working on the multi-generation of video cameras, including the one that's on the moon. So it's always good to have you guys give a talk too. You know, we can talk about your experiences, and I guess it's more recruiting end of this speech. help the students, and they don't teach Morse code anymore. So, you know, we used to teach Morse code too. But and then we have multiple state. Boy Scouts come in, and we teach amateur radio to Boy Scouts. Probably some of you guys were lassoed to be a test taker, test giver, I should say.
Okay, Joe, I do have a question.
Yeah.
In the adventures you've been through here, did you ever get any inkling as to how much AR-88s cost?
New?
Yeah. Was there a sale price, or, you know, I don't know. For instance, we know that RBB, RBC, the Navy receivers, were about $2,100, but they're heavier and probably more money in them. But I've never got a clue as to what RCA thought these radios were worth.
Well, I got a few clues, because what they would in the end of the war. They thought about, RCA got together with their managers and they said, can we commercialize this to a amateur radio market? And that died quickly, because I think they looked at the costs and had a heart attack, you know. there's no way to cheapen, this design that I could see.
Yeah, that wasn't going to work for amateur radio.
Right.
And, I've been through a lot of this stuff, and how there's an RCA email reflector and all of that. And we've been through a lot of stuff and never had any kind of clue. It had to be at least $1,000, but
yeah,
no information.
But here's where it got confusing, Al. The Lend-Lease deal was kind of something for nothing, So that was a bargain. So Churchill grabbed as much as he could, and so did, dare I use the word, Stalin. Stalin took whatever free samples he could get from the U.S. And but that's another story.
Well, there's a story there. There's a document where RCA was soliciting business from the Soviets at the end of the war, and they list all the things they had to offer, including the diversity AR-88s, and there's an AR-88 with a 10-watt push-pull amplifier and all that kind of stuff. But I guess that died pretty quick when we realized they weren't on our side.
Yeah, they never was. I don't think they ever was.
Just out of curiosity, did you ever investigate what the Germans were using?
Other than finding out they were portable, probably what was the popular one? Telefunken?
Okay.
I've heard the word Telefunken.
Well, Telefunken was one of the big manufacturers, and I don't know specifically, but the Germans had some fine radio receivers, but most of them were designed prior to 1940. Things got ugly, and then it was a war, and they were just cranking out what they already had. RCA had already designed the world's great shortwave receivers for the Navy and the Army and everybody else. And now they said, okay, let's build a world-class commercial receiver using everything they had learned. They took the latest tubes and, like Joe says, maybe cost no object, and they built this thing, and they covered a lot of bases. There's a very sophisticated IF amplifier and filtering system, and the thing has the cleanest audio amplifier that anybody had ever seen, which helps you hear signals down in the noise. So it was an amazing piece of work, but it was based on the fact that they were the 700-pound gorilla of shortwave receiver design, and they did one more for themselves.
Can either of you guys explain to the rest of us and myself the diversity AR-88s being different than the standard AR-8, and what was the point of them? That they were sitting on different frequencies, or but yet they were all connected.
Okay, well,
Go ahead.
Well, there's two forms of diversity. One is space diversity. Right. You have multiple antennas. Right. There's also such a thing as frequency diversity, but that probably doesn't apply here. And basically, what you do is you take the AVC voltage out of each receiver, and it goes into some logic, and the receivers vote, and and the guy that has the strongest AVC signal, they turn on his signal to the output. And so, like selective fading on shortwave, you can easily hook up R390s this way, which is my only real experience with this. But it's amazing to watch. The fade comes in, you've got two different antennas, and the one receiver fade, you watch it, S meter fades down, the other one fades up, and the output signal remains constant.
Yeah.
And so the big setup was three receivers, but sometimes it's only two.
Yeah, because I heard the word Trinity used in it, also,
Yeah, the antennas, so what you want to do is pick it up on different phases and certain atmospheric problems that would pick up in one that would drop in the other, as Al described. That's the way I remember it. And I know AT&T, the long lines they settled on stacked rhombic antennas, and then it phased the rhombics together.
When they ran these, radios in diversity mode, did they connect the oscillators together so that they would all be on exactly the same frequency?
I don't know, Al. Do you know the answer on that?
I don't think that was particularly the case with the AR-88s. RCA and the phone company built a lot of special purpose diversity receivers for long distance stuff, and they may well have used one LO for multiple receivers, but that's not the way the AR-88s were set up, to the best of my knowledge.
Hey, Joe?
Yeah.
A couple of questions. I have one question, but you mentioned AT&T and rhombic antennas. Do you know where these were? Where they use the rhombic antennas? The reason I'm asking was I worked for AT&T. I retired about 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked up in Netcong when they had the
Mm-hmm.
underground building.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was up there was a rumor that all that property
Right.
was used for rhombic antennas back during the war.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, Rhombic, and I think through Netcom, and in Lawrenceville also had, they demolished these huge beautiful buildings, and then they, I guess they tried to turn it back to farmland, I guess, after that.
Well, it wasn't a beautiful building. It was underground, no windows.
Oh, that one? Oh, the one in Lawrenceville was very nice. It was it wasn't underground.
The Netcong, you had to go up about a 1 mile road in a little shack, and you had to walk down 4 flights of stairs.
Yeah.
All-improved building. Everything was springs. The toilets on springs, believe it or not. Question I had about the receiver. So this is manufactured at 1940, 41? About?
Yeah.
Okay, I was looking at the specs and the schematic earlier, and what made this such a great receiver? Because the sensitivity didn't seem that great. It was like 2.2 microvolts, I think it said, on the specs. And also, why didn't they use dual conversion? Or was that not big in that time frame?
Well, first of all, the overall attention to the front end is very well. When you have that many tune stages, and then you have a special attention meant to drift. Also, as Al mentioned, the audio quality was superb, and it is superb. I mean, I have an AR-88 myself at home, and it's just gorgeous. It just sounds fantastic. So, I think if you're a Y operator that has to listen maybe 7 to 10 hours a day on this, you have to have a stable receiver, and it has to have you're listening to code, so you have to keep the tone insertion stable, and you have to be able to hear any slight shift, which means the audio bandwidth has to be good, because it's to listen to the low shift and the high shift. So my guess is sensitivity I found to be pretty much on par with today's electronics. I don't. Al, did you?
Sensitivity is not a big deal on HF until you get up to 10 meters or something, because the atmospheric noise is such that just doesn't enter into it.
Right.
But it wasn't until after the war that they really got into dual conversion receivers, and that has to do with with image rejection on the front end and overall stability. And the shortcoming of the AR-88, it's stable, and that gear-driven dial, you can put it back on a frequency, but tuning it to a particular frequency, you need a reference of some sort. So, and that problem doesn't get solved until the Collins receivers in the late 1940s. But other than that, it's as good a receiver as anybody had at that point. I used to know the count, but there's 12 or 13 tuned circuits in the IF.
Right.
And you get a shape factor on those filters that rivals crystal filters in modern receivers.
Okay, that'll give you selectivity.
Right.
Select. Well, it's not just width. It's skirt selectivity. How close you can get up to a strong signal and not be bothered by it.
Okay.
Right.
And they managed to, with the 2 RF stages and the hot tubes, they managed good sensitivity all the way up to 30 megahertz. amazingly so. And so it was really a superior receiver.
Right. I think you combine the skirts of the IF with the additional filtering on the front end, the 2 stages of RF tracked filter. That's superb. And then you're right. You're less concerned about sensitivity but you are concerned about overload. I mean, if you put a monster antenna on, you don't want something so sensitive that it overloads. That third order intercept is so poor that you can't hear it. So that it's very important to have it would not be easily overloaded.
And the two tuned RF stages, that's so you have reasonable image rejection at the high frequencies, because you've only got I don't know if it's 455 or what, but you have an IF in the 455 neighborhood, and so the image is only 910 away, and when you're at 30 megahertz, that's a small fraction. So you need good filters there not to have a problem with spurious responses on the images.
Right.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, and that's much more expensive box than the HRO to build too, because the HRO, you just have the plug-in coils, and here you have the amazing,
Yeah, well, the HRO was obsolete the year after it was invented. It was the Hammerland came out with the Super Pro, and that just makes the HRO look really tired. The Brits used the HRO because the Army and whatnot gobbled up all the Super Pro production, and the Brits bought what they could get their hands on.
Al, it may have been obsolete, but the HRO was built for 30 years. Think about that, 1934 to 1964. I mean,
that's because of all the horse shit that James Millen put out in QST, A, and B, because of the plug-in coils, it made a good laboratory receiver. If you needed something to tune all the way down to 50 kilohertz in your lab, well, then you bought an HRO 50 or an HRO 60 on up into the 60.
Yeah.
But
the 60 was magnificent. Yeah, my boss Les Allen had a 60, and that's magnificent. Yeah, that's really nice. And I own to this day, I wouldn't give this one up at all, but I have a HRO 500, which is the first solid state communications HRO.
If you can keep it running.
Oh, come on. Of course I could keep it running.
Oh, well, I had one and I gave up on it.
You mean
plug-in transistors? And,
germanium. Yeah, germanium transistors.
Plug-in transistors.
I think it's the world's first synthesizer too, right? It's an early.
Yeah, that was pretty early. You gotta argue whether the Raycal RA-17 wasn't synthesized. Well, sort of synthesized.
Yeah.
Either way, but they're not truly synthesized. I don't think that happens until you get to the Collins. What is it? 651 S1.
Yeah, but where are you going to get the Vita root dial that John's taught? I just love it. It's, to me, I always wanted a 500, and I finally got a chance to buy one. And then I've got the whole Helicrafters lines too, but they can't compare. None of the Helicrafters can compare to any of this stuff.
Yeah, well, Helicrafters is built to a price and built for the ham market, basically, and so there you go.
Joe?
Yeah.
One quick comment and then a question, and maybe a comment for Al too. I know that I've never seen ever retail advertising for the 88.
No.
Ever. And yet RCA advertised the heck out of its predecessor, the AR-77. So I don't know if that gives us some clue. Maybe take the price of the AR-77 and double it. You might have some idea what the AR-88 cost, because there were a lot of ads for the 77 in QST.
They were designed by two separate organizations within RCA, and the 77 was specifically designed for the ham market.
Yeah,
That
it
would-
was
Sort of as a counter to the HQ-120. Okay, and I've never had one, but they look like a pretty good receiver.
Well, that was exactly what I was saying, is that you're talking two completely different markets. Now, I've seen quite a few ads in the military journals for AR-88s. That was very heavily advertised in military circles.
I mean, as surplus or?
No. This is when they were building them. They were selling them as new. But you see, it's an artificial market because these are all government.
Right.
Yeah.
The question I had, that picture you showed of the tunnel with the young woman with her AR-88, what are those British-looking receivers on the other side? Do you know?
I figure it's either Marconi or Telefunk. I don't think it's Telefunk. It's probably Marconi.
Okay.
Well, the Brits are rumored to have gobbled up all the ham gear they could possibly do to build those intercept stations.
Yeah, let me see if I can find that.
And I have seen what are alleged to be pictures of intercept stations with AR-77s, which, you know, they have some snazzy deco looks. Whatever they lack in performance, they have, you know.
Yeah. Well, I got a lot of the details from you guys know the Universal book on collectibles? Fred Osterman's Shortwave Receivers Past and Present.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. To me, this is a requirement to collect. You should have one of these.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
This is Marv. Not related to the technical aspects of the radio. You had mentioned that it was built under Lend-Lease.
Yes.
And it's kind of interesting how Roosevelt tried to sell all this Lend-Lease stuff to the Congress. And the way he described it, he tried to make it as easy as he could for them to understand it. So he gave this analogy. Say your neighbor's house is on fire, and he's got a hydrant, but he doesn't have any hose. And he doesn't say to you, well, I'll give you this hose to put out the fire if you pay me $15 for it. He says, but if you say to him, well, I'll give you this hose, and if it's still good when you're done with it, just give it right back to me. That was sort of the Lend-Lease aspect of it. And if you use it and you destroy it later in some time in the future, give me $15. And that's the analogy he used to make the Congress feel that they weren't really giving Britain any money. They were just sort of borrowing all this stuff. And the intent was that at the end of the war, they give them back all this crap, all the boats and the tanks and the stuff. Yeah. But of course, that never happened. But that was the only way that Roosevelt could, if it wasn't basically the things that won the war, and they look at the Enigma machine and things like that. If it wasn't for Lend-Lease, Britain was at the end of the bombings in 40 and 41. Yeah. Britain had nothing. They were down, except that they could make airplanes, they could make jets. But as far as any other materials, they didn't have any ships. They didn't have any tanks. They didn't have any, And basically, Lend-Lease is what saved them until the U.S. got in the war. But I thought it was kind of funny that at the end of the war, all this stuff would be sent back to the United States.
We're supposed to get it back
in good shape. And thanks for lending me this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I don't mind Churchill. I would lend Churchill anything he wanted, but Stalin, I don't know. I just think I wouldn't help any homicidal maniac to in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, but he was taking the pressure off the Brits, is what.
Right. At the time, that front that he established in Russia took like Al says, it took the pressure off the Brits, and basically it helped them out quite a bit, even though they knew the guy was a tyrant. But the thing was, though, that they needed that second front, and Russia had millions of men to throw into the fire. So they said, we'll give them whatever they want. They can throw as many people at them as they want, as long as they hold off the Germans until we get a chance to rearm.
Yeah. No, I guess he was a necessary evil at the time, but no doubt about it, he was evil, and I think some of the deals Roosevelt made with him were probably not too cool, and in terms of sharing Poland. Who gets Poland? Well, you can have Poland, Stalin.
Hey, Joe, I have AR-88 LF, and I was curious to find out, or why, maybe you know, it was made in Montreal, Canada. Mm-hmm. You know anything about that?
Yeah, and the one I ended up getting was LF. So I got a low frequency. That was that coil I had shown that was open, was an LF coil. So yeah, they made low frequency units too. And I'm not sure if that was, yeah, and it was, I think it was made up in Canada, right?
Yeah, that's what it said. On mine, it says in Montreal. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, they did set up manufacturing in Montreal. They set up manufacturing in Illinois. They set up manufacturing a bunch of places. And yeah, I find them hard to get a hold of, clean ones. So I got mine on an estate sale, and it actually came from RCA, and I think there's a difference in having the meter and not. It made a big difference. I wanted one with the meter.
Yeah, well, everybody wants one with the meter. Yeah. Well, hopefully in the very near future, there will be, as I spoke to you yesterday, there will be some AR-88s available in an auction that New Jersey Antique Radio Club and its other participants will be holding. And you should see some of them coming up for auction.
Yeah, I think Sarnoff would like to get another one. And
how many were made?
It's a good question. I have some notes here. Let me grab them.
Why do people park in driveways and drive on parkways? That's probably an easier question.
Yeah, from the little I did research on mine, I guess because of the Lend-Lease situation, they really weren't enumerated. They just cracked them out and sent them over. And I'm not sure why. Maybe it's classified. Who knows?
Supposedly, RCA did not want them coming back into this country when the war was over. They did not want them back. They wanted people to buy new stuff.
Right. And that they were to be destroyed. And
well, at least, if not destroyed, left in jolly old England or Mother Russia or wherever for those people to enjoy. Don't bring them back.
From what I read, that they were supposed to be destroyed, but you know how us radio people are about destroying things. So
yeah, a lot of Russian hams got their hands on it.
Yeah, that stuff all ended up in Ham Shack. Most of it.
All they did was tie off that RCA medallion on the front, and that made it a Russian receiver as soon as they took that off. You know? A quick radio geek out moment here. The AR-88, for reasons which I don't understand, did not have a crystal phasing control. So the picture that Joe showed of the one with the gray face that had a crystal phasing control is a CR-88. That was the following model. Some useless trivia for you.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, you can pick them right out. Looking for the three knobs under the tuning knob is CR-88.
And when I got mine, I was so disappointed that the tuning shaft was frozen, but of course it wasn't frozen. The little knob underneath the tuning knob is a lock. And once I unlocked that, off it went.
Well, it's good you didn't try to force it,
Hey, while Joe was looking up his information, can I jump in with something non-tech here? This is Mike, the new guy.
Go ahead, new guy.
I had it.
Yeah. First of all, the date on that, the July 25th at InfoAge?
Yes.
July 25th, okay. And that's a tailgate, like a sale thing?
Tailgate sale, show, and Hamfest, yes.
Okay, and I'm just curious. Out of the group, are most of you tech or collectors or both, or fit what proportions?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
Is Fred Warra still on the line? Is he gone?
Yes, I am.
I know you from my Grover's Mill show, right?
From where now?
War of the Worlds at Grover's Mill Coffee.
Oh, yeah, and I know Mike Jarmus, and I'm glad to see that he's still around and everything. I meant to call him just this week.
You were at the last one, then I saw you pop up on the screen here, and that was kind of fun. But just the other thing is I don't do any restoration. I don't do anything with electronics. But my current project is I'm restoring the cabinet of a Philco 37610 floor model. So if anybody wants to work on the chassis, that's all I got.
Well, we can find somebody for you to do that.
Or now that you're a member of the club, you'll learn how to do it yourself.
Nah. Just like I'm the singer in my band because I was always too lazy to learn an instrument. So.
Here's what I found on the AR-88. It's labeled in Fred's book as extremely scarce. Well, that's probably bad. They probably disappeared. But it also says that quite a few were made in Brazil. So it was made in the U.S., Canada, UK, France, and Brazil.
Oh, never heard Brazil. Wow.
Yeah. The Sociedade Nacional de Electronica. They produced for the Brazilian Navy.
There he is.
AR-88, Brazilian Navy, under license from RCA.
Yeah, RCA Radio Marine. That's right, yeah.
Yeah. But it says, this was after World War II, though. In 1950, they had a license from RCA to make it. That's cool.
Michael Jarmus?
Yes, sir.
I have a Sherlock Holmes series that we were talking about, the black and whites. Would you be interested in me sending that over to you so you could watch it?
I got a few on some budget DVDs. You're talking about the old movies with Rathbone?
No, it's something else. I'll tell you what, I got your number on your card, and I'll give you a buzz maybe sometime tomorrow. I meant to call you, and I'm glad to see that you're around. I didn't realize it was you talking to me a minute ago. So, but,
yeah, did you chime in when I was being introduced before, or not? Was that you?
Listen, Mike and Fred. Let's conclude with Joe's presentation, please.
That's too private. Sorry.
Okay, so it does look like. The only other thing I wanted to add was at the end of the war, they did talk about doing a commercial version, gave up quickly, but then they did market the diversity sets for the military at the end of World War II. And as I said earlier, everything in Bletchley Park and anything associated with that was all destroyed, burned. And VR-150 was the voltage regulator. Yeah, the VR-150. 14 tubes, an optional battery powered, really? I can't imagine that puppy being powered by external batteries. Maybe Fred got that one wrong.
No, I think there's a jumper on the rear panel, and you can feed voltage in there.
Right. And it looks like the last addition on this thing was the 50 kilohertz calibrator, like you were saying earlier, is knowing exactly where you are on frequency was a challenge without a calibrator.
Yeah, I think that picture of the rack at Bletchley with the 8 AR-88s or whatever. I think you have a high-res copy of that. I think there's an LM or BC221 frequency meter among that stuff.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't see any pan adapters at that time, which there was in other equipment, which would have been, I think, helpful. If I was a Y operator, I'd want to look at it, look at the spectrum.
That double tuned front end would make it a little difficult, though.
Yeah, that's true. You'd need a separate front end and just for the video, to keep the signals visible,
Joe, were like operators just assigned, like somebody said, okay, Susie, you're sitting on 3150 kilohertz today, and look around and see what's around there?
Yeah, they had logged, if you look at the log sheet, they talked about particular IDs of the field transmitter. So they were assigned more to the transmitter and the person, Fritz uses this transmitter, and they identified Fritz by his code, his Morse code fit, which I thought pretty remarkable. I heard that. I'm like, okay, so much for AI, right? Some very smart cookies doing that. And
if I went out to buy one of these today, what do you think it would cost?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question. When I tried to buy one for the museum, they were, let's see, they started at about $1,000. So I got the one that was corroded for $300. That wasn't working. But I would say today, if you look on eBay, you see them up to over $3,000. What's that?
Yeah, I think $1,000 for a clean working one is a good deal.
Yeah.
Any given day on eBay, if you have 2 or 3 people chasing it, well, then that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, they show up a little bit cheaper, but sometimes they're not in a great neighborhood. The last one I saw that was about $500 was in Detroit, so I'm not going to drive to Detroit.
I believe stay tuned, because I think in the upcoming year, I think there's going to be some coming up for auction. I heard that.
Yes, I think that's from Inside Baseball there, yes.
I think I know something about this, yeah.
We had one at Parsippany. I think it went for about $250. It was an LF. I remember that Joe Connor bought it.
That's a good deal.
Yeah, well, an LF is a somewhat useless item aside from just, I have an RCA receiver here, look at it. But, I think most of us really want an HF radio.
Well, no, isn't the LF, though, just skips, what is it, the AM? It's still got most of the HF bands. It just doesn't have the AM broadcast band. They added on stuff at the bottom.
That's correct.
That's a good question.
It's not useless. It's just you don't get most of the AM broadcast band.
No, you don't.
Right.
There's some other weirdnesses, like the IF frequency is in the middle of the AM broadcast band.
It's 725 or 750. It's strange, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's still a nice receiver, and it was.
It just isn't the desirable one, and you could probably score one for not that much money, and it's really variable. You could drag one of these out to one of these swap meets, and nobody has money in their pocket, and it sells for $300. If you don't feel like carrying it back. But
don't forget about the weight. That's more important of wanting to drag it anywhere.
I bought a scruffy one at Sussex, circa 91 or 92, $40.
Is it still scruffy, John?
Yes, but it works though.
All right.
Well, if you want to tell those kind
I'll double your money if you want.
If you want, so how many of you guys have one of these super rare radios?
I'd quadruple your money on that one. I collect military interception receivers, so I really start with the AR-88 and go up. So I had a bunch of Microtel interception equipment, which isn't that old, and I have a bunch of Watkins Johnson. I got racks of Watkins Johnson and Microtel equipment. So I had a collector. I put one in the paper for $1,500, a microtel. Guy says, I'll take it. And he says, I'll meet you at the airport. I'm flying in with my Cessna. So then I sold them all. I sold them all my microtels at that point. I figure, how much money you got, man? You could have the whole collection.
You know, I collect radios and other things, that engines, stuff like that, things that are heavy and have oil in them. And I have to say, the AR-88 is the first piece of radio equipment I've ever owned that's more like an engine, in that it has an oil leak, and it actually has a drip pan under it at the moment because it's leaking oil. But, now that's a project I have to get to, but
well, that's those 3-section bathtub caps.
Yep,
some of those were good, and other ones the rubber has turned to guppy poop, and the oil comes out.
The funny story is, when I picked it up, it was sitting on a concrete floor, and just like an old car being parked there, the concrete floor had a stain when I took the radio away.
Oh my God!
What, was this a Joe Crow thing?
Al, however did you guess that?
Maybe you had to lubricate the band switch.
All right, do we have any more questions for Joe? All right, listen, Joe, we really want to thank you for your presentation.
Thank
you. Something else we want to thank you for is becoming a member of our club. We really do appreciate that. We like to have a diversity of different people who join our club, and you're one of them. So we really appreciate that, and we expect to tap you for other information down the road, and maybe even more presentations too.
Sure. Well, it goes both ways. I'd like to lasso you guys for some talks over at the Sarnoff Museum.
That can happen. That can happen.
All right. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I wish we were at Bowen Hall. We could give you a virtual clap or something, but that's about best we can do right now.
Yeah, I can't wait till this is over.